Good day, Mike. First of all, thanks for agreeing to do this video interview with me over Skype. For our audience, could you please introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about where you live and work and what you currently do?
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, happy to do this, Guy. I was really honored that you asked, so thank you, first of all. So a couple of questions in there. Let's start with me. I'm Mike Kunkle. Anybody that wants to hunt me down, it's Kunkle. I spell it right. I live in the Boston area now, in the suburbs in Billerica. And I got my start, oddly, in the music profession, completely outside of what I'm doing today. I have 2 degrees in music from Mansfield University of Pennsylvania. And right out of college, I played professionally for 2 years. I played trombone and euphonium. And when I decided to hang that up for a variety of reasons, I took an inside sales job near my hometown, right? And I was horrible, absolutely a horrible salesperson. But for some reason, the owner saw something in me, and he kind of put me under his wing, and he trained me, he coached me, all the things that we would hope someone would do. And interestingly, the parallel for me is I applied almost everything I learned in the music profession, especially about the power of purposeful practice, which I drone on about a lot today. And eventually, I became their top salesperson. And I was running that business for him for a few years, and he was sort of an absentee owner, which made him really happy. But I finally figured out you don't get promoted to owner, right? So I jumped and I left for a sales job in corporate America. And that year, I outsold the 5 other people in that office combined. And they made the classic mistake. They promoted me to sales manager. But I had already done that for this small owner. So I used everything I learned about selling and training and coaching. And this guy, actually a small business owner, he had all these systems in place to make his business hum. So I applied all that stuff at this corporate sales manager gig. And I increased sales in that office 600% year over year. And I had a corporate recruiter one time tell me not to put that on my resume because it just sounded like a lie, right? But at that point, a really pivotal thing happened for my career. They called me in and they asked me, did I think I could train other people to do what I had just done? And I lied right through my teeth and I said, absolutely. And actually, I really wanted to get into training. It's what I secretly wanted to do. I had taken a Dale Carnegie course. I had joined Toastmasters, and I was reading everything I possibly could. And so now looking back, I've spent 35 years in some odd blend of either the sales profession or sales training and development, which for me eventually morphed into this whole sales performance consulting thing. And for the last 25 of that, I have been on both sides of the fence. I've either been a corporate department leader, so you know all the titles, right? Sales training, sales effectiveness, sales performance development. We never know what we want to be when we grow up. Or I've been an independent sales transformation consultant. So in all those roles, I always just considered that my job was to help companies figure out how do they drive dramatic revenue growth through best-in-class training strategies and eventually through sales transformation methods. And if there were one bane in my career, Guy, after all this time and all the fun and all the results, it would be how challenging it is sometimes to get the very people who are responsible for driving revenue growth to actually do the things that will drive revenue. But that's that's been where I've had all my fun, and so I've been lucky that I've worked for some big companies like GE and McKesson. I've worked for a startup software provider where I was employee number 11. I've gotten to develop courses for Richardson, which is a recognized top 20 sales training company. I worked at Brainshark recently, which is a leading sales enablement software firm. And I've gotten to do work for clients like Intel, Cisco, and most recently LinkedIn, which I'm really proud of because LinkedIn has really been a big boon to my career and a lot of other people. So it was really cool to do some work for them and see what a cool organization they were. Then I've done a lot of work for mid-market firms. So that's me. And then you asked about some of the more interesting things I've worked on. So in terms of fun projects, I once developed after needs analysis, of course, for all the front-end analysis people, we developed a 3-week blended learning curriculum for sales onboarding, and it culminated after all the distributed time people, going through e-learning and reading, and back then CD-ROMs and talking with their managers and tape sets. I mean, we really mixed up the learning medium, but they did that. And we also had early WebEx at that time. So we touched base with people at least once a day, so they didn't feel disconnected. But then they culminated in this 4.5-day, really intense thing that was well before I had ever heard the term flipped classroom. But that's exactly what it was. We had got all the knowledge into their heads. We helped them prepare for exercises and activities. We had tested them and had checkpoints and gating along the way. And if they lived through that 2 weeks, they came into this week in the classroom where we just worked their tails off, simulating what they'd actually have to do on the job when they went back, moving from left to right through the sales process. And they had exercise, activity, role plays, and we had feedback loops where they got feedback and then had to rework what they had done and actually apply that feedback right in the class. And that was the beauty for me of that whole flipped classroom, is it was all hands-on stuff. And I have to admit, I got that idea from attending a class called Criteria Referenced Instruction by Bob Mager, where you brought your work into the class and you worked on it right there, right? So that was a ton of fun, and that program delivered just under $400 million in accretive revenue year over year, which was recognized by the CFO and the president as attributed to our efforts and the work that we had done. And when I started there, it was a hard sell to build this program based on the 5 days of death by PowerPoint that they were going through. But we sold the concept as a trial, and the president had all of us sitting around a table at that point and said, "Look, I believe in what you do, and the woman who had brought us all in, and what your vision is. But let me be clear: if we're not sitting around this table a year later and we're not seeing a massive return for what we've invested, not all of us will be sitting here." So those were our pretty clear marching orders. But we had incredible top-down support there, and really delivered. And then earlier, I had delivered an onboarding program that was relatively similar, but we tracked it to see that we had people with 120 days on the job who were outperforming people, a control group that we set up of people with 5 years of experience. That was a lot of fun, but it didn't necessarily make me popular with the people with 5 years of experience. But there was interesting learning in that one, is that this was really early for me. I developed this program. We rolled it out. We had these new people in class for 2 weeks straight after some time in the field preparing. Again, real flipped classroom, but we were still doing some teaching in there. But we actually put them on the phones talking to live customers for a period of time near the end of this class, and I flipped my hat around from trainer to sales coach, and we sent them home with deals in motion. That was the first time I'd ever seen anybody do something like that, and that was fun. But an interesting thing happened. They left that class and they shot off like a Mannheim rocket. For viewers this way, I guess they went off like a rocket. But after that 120-day mark, they started to crest, and actually performance started to decrease. And this is where I learned, and something that many of your listeners probably already know, but it was early in my career, and I figured out, we weren't teaching the managers what their new employees were learning. And there were no systems or reinforcement or coaching or things in place. So these people who we shot off like a rocket started to be influenced, and their behaviors changed to match what everybody else was doing and their guidance from their manager. And so this happened, and then we figured that out, and we put together what we called the Sales Skills Reinforcement Program, and we rolled it out across the country, and then we lifted the performance back up of those people, plus a whole bunch of other people in the middle of that bell curve, and shifted behavior. So we had a tremendous amount of success and fun with that. And then just for a more recent project, I was just helping a client put in an entire competency development framework in place with the goal of really creating an ongoing focus on closing competency gaps and then creating a learning and performance culture. And that was definitely fun. So it's been a really fun ride. Today, I'm I'm the VP of Sales Enablement Services for two sister companies, SPA and SPA Sigma, where I'm doing a bunch of different stuff. I advise clients, I write, get to speak at conferences, I develop and lead webinars. Right now we're developing a sales training course. Got to deliver a workshop recently at a conference. So then I'm really trying to put together a client-focused sales performance system that if for someone who really wants to not just take training, but take training and implement it in a way to change behavior and drive results, that they can take the whole thing and just kind of like, boom, plug it in. So that's me in a nutshell, or as a friend of mine says, that's my story and I'm sticking to it.
I love the smell of measured results in the morning. Excuse me.
Yeah, I'm into that.
That's that's excellent. Thank you so much for sharing all of that with us. Yes, it's about measured results, and maintenance of performance is such a key factor that's often neglected. I'm so glad you brought that into this recording. Let's go back a little bit to, can you share with us a little bit about your first exposure to what some call HPT, human performance technology, or however you refer to it?
Well, I learned it as HPT, like most people who get into it. And this was, I knew you were going to ask me this question, right? This was a real memory exercise. So I figured out it was probably back, my first exposure, I think, was in 1990 when I was running a branch office for HFC. And I had gotten really interested in hiring and training and coaching practices because remember that small business I talked about? Well, I was the beneficiary of all this training and coaching. And then I started to hire other people there, and I noticed how some of them came in, and when I trained them and coached them, they did exactly like I did, and they took off. And other people came in, I trained them and coached them, and they couldn't get out of their own way. So I got interested in the whole thing about hiring really effectively being the first step of onboarding. And so I was interested in all that. And so I joined ASTD at the time, which is now ATD, Association for Talent Development, and NSPI at the time, which is now ISPI, which your listeners probably know, International Society for Performance Improvement. And I wasn't in a position at the time, sadly, to attend the conferences, or we probably would have met many, many years ago. But I'm a big reader, so I devoured every performance improvement journal, the PI quarterlies, which came out that I loved, all the different magazines, training magazine and TD from ATD, and I'm reading all this stuff. And then I started reading all the books that were referenced in there, and some were at the local library, and many that I purchased from my own library. So, and what I did that was a ton of fun for me was I started based on what I was reading, either the stuff in the books or stuff out on the job, and incorporating it into what I did and measuring it to see, was it working? And if not, tried to figure out why not, talk to a couple people, read a little bit more. And so it was that really shaped my approach over time. So I am hugely grateful for my earlier exposure to ATD or to HPT. And interestingly, that first job in corporate America, once they said, hey, could you train other people? And I said, sure. And I started really learning about that. It was really a lucky experience for me that I got into an organization where they didn't really know that much about training. So they were willing to let me run on the way that I thought that it was supposed to happen. But they were really clear that I needed to measure and improve results for what I was doing. And so I just thought that's the way it was everywhere, right? And as I started to get wider exposure, I realized that I had a lucky start because I started to meet more and more people who were just doing butts in seats counting, or not being able to truly do an analysis to figure out is stuff that they were just being asked to train. Should they even go bother to train that? Was training the solution to the problem? You know the drill, right? Mm-hmm. So I was really fortunate to have that lucky start. And then found out that it, wasn't I was at, a small end of the bell curve of people who were really approaching it that way.
Yes. Well, so can you identify for our audience any of the particular people or articles or books that influenced you back then?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a relatively long list. So if you want, I'll also send you a bunch of names. You can, if you could post that up with the video, like I know you do sometimes.
Okay.
But I do have a couple of what I would call the real early influencers who got me started. And by the way, these are all from articles and books. I have never met these people like you have, so I'm really envious of that with your experience. But Bob Meagher was one. He was a big influence on me with the famous six-pack. And then I was lucky at HFC where I worked. They actually became certified internally to teach CRI. So I took criteria referenced instruction, I think in 93 or 94. And so that was a huge early influence, the six-pack and CRI. Another one was Tom Gilbert, probably no surprise.
Mm-hmm.
I came across his book mentioned at NSPI or ISPI, Human Competence, and then learned his six-box behavior engineering model, and was starting to see from all the other things I was being exposed to, some of these common themes and threads that were weaving through these things. I would give a huge nod to Gary Rumler and Alan Brosh in the White Space book. And the systems thinking piece of that had a huge influence on me. Don Clark, not the European Clark, but the American Clark,
Mm-hmm.
and his Big Dog website. I ran across that thing, and I started devouring that, and I could still get lost for hours,
Mm-hmm.
just surfing pages on Don's website and poking around in that. And then probably the other early influence. Geez, there are so many too, though, Guy. But the other one that stands out is probably Jill Harless. I don't own the book today. I don't remember whether it was a library book, where I came across it, but I read Ounce of Analysis at some point about his front-end analysis. And maybe Richard Swanson was another one. I can still picture the green book cover, and it is like the most dog-eared, highlighted book in my library with his book on analysis for improving performance, because I kept trying to figure out, how do I go figure this out better, before I start taking the toaster apart and trying to put it back together, right?
Mm-hmm.
How do I learn where to go poke to actually make a difference? And so those were probably the earliest ones. Rumler's thinking really got me started down the whole systems thinking path. And if I had to say one thing was probably the biggest influence in my career, it was that influence on my ability to change sales results and create sales transformation systems. So that's a big one. The other thing I would add, I haven't thought about this in years until I started thinking about this interview. In 1997 or so, I came across a listserv discussion group. Remember listservs?
Mm-hmm.
It was TRDevL, run by Bill Rothwell and his grad students out of Penn State. And I had an absolute blast there. I learned a lot. I made a lot of great connections. There were a lot of luminaries who hung out on that and were sharing ideas. And so it was a little like a supercharged LinkedIn discussion group with so many power players from the space. And I was really sad when that whole thing ended. And I guess it lives on in some form, but for me it was never the same as it was back in those early days and all the discussions that we had there. So, and then there's a host of people who published in PI Journal and PI Quarterly, and some people whose names I was trying to remember a Tim. There's a guy's face I could see the picture. I read and loved all of his articles, but I can't think of his name for the life of me.
Tim Eskew.
That's it.
Yes.
Tim Eskew. Yeah. I loved his stuff. Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you so much for all of that. Yes, there's a lot of great people. I recognized almost every name that you mentioned. I don't know Rothwell as well, but I've heard his name in the past. But thank you for sharing all of that with us. Let me shift gears here just a bit here. As an example for others, can you share with us your 30-second elevator speech on what you currently do?
Yeah, so anybody that knows me knows that I have a hard time doing anything in 30 seconds. But I would say, so at SPA and SPA Sigma, the sister companies I work for, we help companies improve sales effectiveness and drive profitable growth through the intelligent application of sales analytics, sales training, and sales enablement tools. And what I'm doing behind the scenes is helping build those training courses, the sales enablement tools, how they get strung together to help clients find a way to improve their sales performance.
Excellent. I didn't time that. That's probably pretty close, though. So congratulations on your first 30-second elevator speech.
Yeah, it took me 2 hours to prepare that. Thanks a lot.
But that's part of the point, is that to hone your message down, the early exchange, it needs to be tight, concise, it needs to communicate, and you really need to give some thought and effort to doing that and then practice delivering it. Thank you for that example for all of our viewers. As a lifelong learner, which I'm sure you haven't given any of that up yet, can you share with us a little bit about what your current or next focus for learning is? And are you writing anything in particular? But what can you share with us?
So my focus has shifted a bit right now that I'm spending a lot more time on the vendor side. Either recently I was a consultant on my own. Now I'm working for SPA and SPA Sigma, and so I'm trying to learn more about demand generation and how to take products to market more effectively. So I'm poking around in that and trying to learn more about that for myself. I was fortunate that at BrainShark, they had some really sharp demand generation pros there, and I learned a lot. Actually, for a while, reported to the marketing team, which is somewhat common but less so than reporting to sales when you're in sales enablement. So I'm learning a lot about that. I'm trying to learn more about digital marketing, which is not brand new because I've always been close to the marketing department, but it's all changed so much in the whole concepts of demand generation. So that's what I'm really learning on. Then in terms of what I'm working on, my colleague Doug Wyatt at SPA Sigma and I are co-developing a course that we call Modern Sales Foundations, and we're focusing just on, as the title suggests, what are the foundational skills? And I think a lot about the Pareto principle, right? What are the 20% of the sales behaviors that we believe are producing 80% of the sales results from top producers? And so the course covers the entire customer life cycle. So it starts with, they don't know who you are and how you're going to prospect and do lead generation and create leads. How will you then manage them through the sales process and through the pipeline and do what's referred to as opportunity management? And then once you have an account, how do you logically assign account objectives? Is it a growth account, a maintenance account? After a while, do you need to reactivate it or recover the account? What's your objective with it, and how will you do strategic account management to achieve those objectives? And so across that customer life cycle, the common theme is a buyer-centric mindset and a value-selling focus on understanding and delivering the outcomes that matter most to your buyers. And this is an interesting thing, and I see this guy in the training profession, performance consulting. I see it in sales, and I've never quite wrapped my head around this. But if you think about it, Mac Hannon, Hanan, for anyone who's into sales, he wrote a book called Consultative Selling. It's 49 years ago this year. If I had $1 for every sales leader who has said to me in the past 3 years, we've got to move our people from selling transactionally to selling consultatively, I could just retire right now, right? And 49 years later, we have still not made the shift to the complete buyer-centric, value-focused, ROI-producing type of customer-focused selling that he wrote about 49 years ago. You look at our profession, right? Thinking in terms of performance improvement, we could cite Megger, and we could cite Rumler, and we could cite Gilbert. We could say those guys wrote that stuff X number of years ago, and yet we're still counting butts in seats, or we're still doing training when training isn't the solution to the problem. I don't get the whole knowing-doing gap. even though books have been written on it. But for anyone who's listening to this who wants to get beyond it, the stuff that we're talking about, the resources that have shaped both of our careers, those things are out there. All right. If you're in sales, the books and things are out there that if you want to be on the far right side of the bell curve, there's a path to get there. And I think that's really important. So we're trying to create some of this in this course that we're developing. And so I'm gonna freak out a couple people in the profession and say the word micro learning, right? But we're trying to create it in these bite-sized modules of like 8 to 18 minutes, that can either be self-contained or it can be strung together in a curriculum. And that way you can either use it as an onboarding solution, or you can use it to close identified competency gaps on an ongoing basis, right? And so, and then lastly, we're doing the thing that we've talked about already. We're trying to build reinforcement elements for the program, and sometimes it's simple stuff like quizzes or flash drills that might reinforce learning and foil the forgetting curve, all that stuff. Mm-hmm. We also have virtual coaching challenges using a sales enablement tool, downloadable job aids, manager toolkits to help managers know how to reinforce it. And I've always loved Harless's quote. I've seen you publish this, right? That inside every fat course is a thin job aid trying to get out, right? So we're trying to do our best to keep that in mind and live up to that. And so I know that not every client's going to want an entire sales performance system, but we really want to make it available to anybody who wants it, who wants to truly transform the behavior of their sales force and the results that they deliver. So, and I'm always poking around at a bunch of stuff, right? So I'm working on a sales performance assessment to help try to diagnose more effectively and determine gaps to close. But all that's really taking a back seat right now to getting this course with Doug done. So that's my big focus right now.
Thank you for sharing all that. It's so true that much of this exists. We keep on, or the business, the field, reinvents it under a new label and marketing the same old stuff with a new name, hoping that that's going to sell and have an impact. And it's really the adherence and the rigor to which you embrace what's been known for a long time and put it in place and then maintain it, reinforce it, much as you're doing. But that was a great example. I think of the way to approach things is to, whether you call it chunking or micro learning, there's just enough to get the job done, and be careful of overkill in the extreme with content. Too often that's the case. People don't know how to screen their content by having a focus on the end results that you're striving for.
Yeah, you said chunk, right? So I can't tell you how many times the concept of chunk, sequence, layer, simple concept has paid big dividends for me. And so everyone is clamoring about sales onboarding these days and how do you shorten the ramp up and improve sales results? And, if you set performance milestones, where do you want people to be by when? Mm-hmm. And you have the fist fights because it almost always takes an argument because someone wants to do DocuSign in the first week and they don't need DocuSign until, 6 months from now, right? But if you figure out what's the need to know content, mm-hmm. to get them to that first milestone and teach that and then get them there. And then what's the need to know content to get the next, and you chunk, sequence, and layer that, bam, all of a sudden you have you've cut your onboarding time in half and they're performing at twice the level that they were previously. It's not rocket science, but I just don't see a lot of people doing it.
It's true. I don't think many people do it. And it's a wonder. Let me shift gears again here on you, and my question is there a favorite HPT or systems thinking or sales term or phrase that you would like to define for us? I offer this opportunity to people because perhaps they're annoyed with how the world is using some term or phrase and they would like to put their spin on that. What do you have for us?
Yeah, I could probably rant on a couple of things, but the one that I'll mention because we've talked about HPT is I do wish that we would just drop the T in HPT. Right? I get the intent, I always have, right? But today, especially with as much as technology is flying around us and advancing, I think calling it a technology is a misnomer, in my opinion. And I think it's confusing to a lot of the people who might otherwise gravitate toward it. And if you think about the entire body of work, there's a focus on behavior and performance being a function of the person and the environment, right? So I've wondered for a while if HPT ought not be something more like OPI, right? Organizational Performance Improvement. Now, I'm not vested enough in that to go wrestle anyone to the ground, but I have wondered about it, and I swore that I wasn't going to mention the dreaded learning styles, but if we can't beat this thing into submission this year, I may retire, right? Because there's so much stuff like that just won't die. And then I guess so. The other thing, there's a term that I'm fond of that's probably will never catch fire, right? But I use a lot is the sales performance levers, or just performance levers. Mm-hmm. And I define a performance lever. It's the critical competencies, knowledge, skills, behaviors, or conditions, the environment, which must be present for ethical, sustained, high levels of performance to occur. Now, it's hard to reach that unless you're really trying to do it purposefully, right? And I think there are levers, and this goes back to a ton of the work of the people before me, right? But there are levers at the task, at the role, at the function, and at the organizational level. And if you can get those in alignment, holy cow, your organization will perform at the highest possible level, given all the macro and microeconomic conditions that it's functioning in. But maybe that's more OD work. I don't know, but I've always been fascinated by that. And when you can get the top-down support to make it work, you can really move the needle if you start getting those performance levers in alignment. So that'd be one that I'd like to see more of us talking about.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for all of those. Yes, the whole HPT. There's been questions about the T. There's questions about the H. Danny Langdon famously said, get the H out. So many have gravitated to performance improvement, or now there's evidence-based practices for performance improvement. So many different names. And as somebody that I did an interview with yesterday said, when he was asked, what do you want to call, and it was the Gilbert's behavior engineering model, he said to the head salesperson at a big company, he said, what do you want to call it? He didn't name it. He refused to give it the name that it had already existed for it. He just said, what do you want to call it? Because then it would make sense to you, his customer at that point, which was, the person was embracing it. And he mentioned, and I agreed with him, that too often we use our language instead of speaking the language of our customers. So if we can get our customers to begin to name some of these concepts and tools so that it makes sense to them, it's more likely to make sense to the other people in their niche, in their neck of the woods. So thank you for learning styles. I don't know. At one point I believed in learning styles, and I was disabused of that back in 1985 because I made my first national presentation using that in one of my slides, and people came up to me afterwards and quickly set me straight, which was a good thing. As kind of a wrap to our interview here, I'd like to again take you back to some of perhaps your early days with HPT or human performance, evidence-based practices, systems thinking, and do you have some stories that you can share with us that might carry some meaning for our audience?
I hope so. The thing that jumps out at me was Rumler's quote about pitting a good performer against a bad system and the system winning almost every time. For some reason, that hit me right in the face when I heard that. It was the other one is the Zig Ziglar quote, completely different, but that you get what you want in life by helping enough other people get what they want. That was one of those things when I heard both of those quotes, it was like, bam, those were aha moments and stopped me dead in my tracks. And so the Rumler thing, right, that really got me thinking about creating the right environment, of course, behavioral engineering model, right, defining roles, putting the right people in the right roles, and later Collins would say right people in the right seats on the bus, right? That's a famous quote. Establishing the process and methodology, doing it based on what your customer is doing as opposed to doing it inside out in a vacuum, and then building the training, coaching, and other support systems and sales management systems to really get a sales force performing at its highest level. And again, for me, it's all sales all the time, right? So I'm thinking about it that way. So based on that work, I started thinking through all these systems and moving parts. And man, in an organization, there are so many. But I always think again, 80-20, right? What's the 20% of stuff I could focus on that would get me 80% of the results? Because trying to take an academic approach into a sales organization is like trying to push an elephant through a keyhole, right? So I've sort of nailed it down over the years to a sales selection system. How do you make sure you're putting the right person in that right role? How do you create an environment and a support system for them, right, with the right tools and processes and methodologies, and teaching them, giving them the business acumen and financial acumen that they need to have real business conversations rather than go pitch products? How do you give them an understanding of the market that you're serving and those buyers and how your customers' businesses operate and how you can support them, and giving those things a sales learning system so that you're starting with the right content in the center, because it doesn't matter how good you do the rest of it. If the stuff you're teaching won't produce a result in the real world, you're dead in the water anyway. But then how do you design learning in an effective way? How do you get the managers engaged? How do you go through what I call the 5 stages of sales mastery and behavior change? You acquire the knowledge, you reinforce and sustain that. You give them an opportunity to practice skills and get feedback and re-practice rather than practicing on the customer. How do you create a plan to purposely transfer then what was learned in the learning environment to the real world? And since it's not likely that the first time they do it, they've done it really well, or they're going to continue to do it without some nudging, how do you guide and coach them over time, whether it's through workflow performance support, whether it's through coaching from managers or others? How do you get it to be the way we do things around here, which is my favorite definition of culture? And so I created these systems of selection, sales support, sales learning, and sales management. In the times that I have actually been able to sell that concept and get it implemented, the results weren't 11% year over year. It was like 400% year over year. And so it's that systems thinking piece that has probably done the biggest. And then the other thing that's dawned on me is that I've over the years is that we're so insular and inside out. And so what I've started to do is really flip the script to start with the market and buyers in mind, and added sort of a buyer-centric or buyer-oriented foundation on which all of the other systems are built, to be sure that what you're building is serving the buyer, which is that back to that Zig Ziglar thing, right? You get what you want if you help enough other people get what they want. And those two quotes kind of converge then in my work. And the other thing that I've sort of taken away from all of these experiences is the power of top-down support. Because in one of the projects that I shared earlier where we just crushed it, we had top-down support straight from the CEO and president and CFO, and we worked with the CFO. And I'm going to say something that will upset some people, but all training evaluation is a lie to some degree, right? What it is, you have to get together and agree on the lies you're going to believe, right? Because attribution is so difficult. Was it, in month 3, was it the marketing program? Was it the price reduction? Or was it the training that lifted that result? But if you look at what you're doing in every given month and you get the right players together, you can do your best to at least figure out if we're seeing a lift in that month that is different than the trend line up to that point. How are we going to attribute that lift based on all the things that we're working and pushing on performance that month? And that's what we did at this company. And we came out at the end with something that was pretty logical, but we came at it the same concept that your friend talked about, because they bought into it because they helped to build it. And when the CFO helped build it, and we reported back to him exactly the way that we said we were, it's very difficult for him to argue with the fact that we had lifted performance. We had marketing in the room, and we had the training team in the room, and we had the sales leaders in the room, and the product management people in the room, and when we looked at all of these various factors. Now, heck, all the work that we did to do that, we probably reduced the ROI by 20% just trying to figure out what the ROI was, right? So I think there has to be a balance on that sort of thing. But the thing that made that work was the incredible amount of top-down support. And we weren't given carte blanche, of course, right? But the support that we got was public inside the organization and phenomenal. And at one point, frontline sales managers were required to get certified in both our sales methodology, what we were teaching their people, and our coaching methodology, which is how they were going to work with them. And this was a process over time. And if somebody failed initially, and the key to a good certification process is that if you don't have people failing, you're not certifying anything, right? So we had people fail, but they weren't just booted out. They had other chances to get there, and there was remediation work and support. But if you couldn't get certified eventually, you could not work there as a manager. And I don't know that I've seen that kind of top-down support in many other places. And oddly about this place, though, Guy, is it may have been the only place that message wasn't needed, because these managers really wanted to do a great job. They wanted to support their reps better. But I wish many times over my career that I had that kind of top-down support in every company or in every engagement, because I think you can still make an impact with a groundswell or a grassroots initiative, but let's not kid ourselves, right? Systems work, real culture change, all the stuff that we do goes so much more smoothly and can produce so much better results if it's really an organizational initiative from the top down. And I remember a story from some friends at Marriott that always made me laugh, right? He said Bill Marriott decided that he wanted to pursue a serious quality initiative. Now, we all know how that turned out, right? But he had his second in command, apparently, call up Malcolm Baldrige. Right? And according to the story, as it was told to me, Baldrige said, "I'd be absolutely happy to help as soon as Bill Marriott calls me personally," and he hung up the phone, right? And the rest is history. Bill Marriott called him, and now, they're a Baldrige Award winner, and but the lesson from that story is one that I never forgot, and I've seen that play out a ton of times in my career.
You and earlier, before we hit the record button on this, you mentioned a person that has been influential with you, mentoring you. You've never met them live, just like you and I have never met live, but you mentioned how you've interacted with Dave Stein. Can you tell us a little bit about that story?
Yeah, Dave and I met, I don't know how many years ago now, in a LinkedIn group of all places, right? Which at one point were so much more interactive and engaging and less of a link farm than they are today. But we were in there talking about various sales enablement, sales training, sales performance initiatives, and we found ourselves saying the same stuff. So then we started to reference each other, and all of a sudden we were emailing and we're connected on LinkedIn, and then we started talking on the telephone. And like you said, Dave and I have never been in the same room at the same time. But over my career, he has been an absolutely phenomenal mentor for me. And he retired, but he did get to do an interesting thing with me once. So I was working for a company where I was trying to sell this concept of the whole systems approach and doing a top producer analysis the right way. And they said, well, the CEO, I guess, said to my boss, how do we know this is going to work if we invest in all this? Is there any backup for this kind of thing? Anybody that can vouch for it? And Dave Stein was running a company called ES Research, which was sort of like the Consumer Reports for sales training and sales performance or effectiveness companies. And so I said, well, you could always talk to Dave Stein. He could review it and tell you, this is what Dave does, and here's his company, and here are the reports he produces on these sales training and sales effectiveness companies for buyers. And so they hired Dave, and Dave reviewed my work. And we probably got closer even after that, because he saw that what I was doing, what he believed in, were so in sync. And he actually gave me some great feedback then. And then that's, I think, probably where the whole mentoring thing began. And I don't know if you asked Dave if he'd actually say he was my mentor. We never formally, had anything in place. But he was one of those few people that I felt I could reach out to for and be completely authentic and get authentic advice on things that were sometimes, professional and sometimes had more of a personal nature, but, about work-related stuff. And He shaped my career in so many positive ways. And again, never been in the same room at the same time. So that was he was a big one for me.
Yes, we live in such a virtual world nowadays. It's an important lesson that we need to establish those kinds of networks. If they're not geographically possible to establish a face-to-face kind of a relationship, we need to learn how to use the technology in today's world. Mike, thank you so much for agreeing to do this interview with me. I really appreciate it, and I look forward to following you additionally on LinkedIn and out there on social media. Thanks. Have a great day. Cheers.
Thank you, guys. Been a pleasure. You have a great day, too.